morning, everybody. I'm really excited to be continuing in our study in this devotional series on the Holy Spirit. And this morning we want to be looking at this, the question of why were the gifts of the Holy Spirit given? And to try and answer that question, I want to read for us in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And we're going to read together 1 Corinthians chapter 12 from verse 1 to verse 11. It says this: "Now about the gifts of the Spirit, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. You know that when you were pagans, somehow or the other you were influenced and led astray to mute idols. Therefore I want you to know that no one who is speaking by the Spirit of God says, 'Jesus be cursed,' and no one can say, 'Jesus is Lord,' except by the Holy Spirit. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of workings, but in all of them and in everyone it is the same God at work. Now to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. To one there is given through the Spirit a message of wisdom, to another a message of knowledge by means of the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by that one Spirit, to another miraculous powers, to another prophecy, and to another distinguishing between spirits, to another speaking in different kinds of tongues, and still to another the interpretation of tongues. All these are the work of one and the same Spirit, and he distributes them to each one just as he determines." And so obviously for our purposes this morning, looking at why the gifts were given, we want to focus specifically on verse 7, where Paul says, "Now to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good." Paul is highlighting here that the gifts of the Holy Spirit are a display of the Holy Spirit in the lives of believers, and they are given for the common good of the local church. So that means that by their very nature, the gifts of the Spirit are means by which we are able to serve others, and are means by which the Church of Christ is built up. In fact, Paul continues in 1 Corinthians 14, just 2 chapters on from where we've just read, still talking into the context of the gifts of the Spirit, but there he focuses more specifically on the gift of prophecy. But he says that in verse 4 and 5 that through the gift of prophecy the church is edified, the church is improved, the church is built up. Peter tells us in 1 Peter 4 verses 10 that we each need to use our gifts that have been given to us by God to serve others. So the gifts were never given to make the person who has the gift look great. It was never given to puff them up or to draw attention to themselves, but rather the gifts of the Holy Spirit were given for the common good, not to make us feel great, not to make the person using the gift experience something supernatural, but rather as a means to serve the church, so that in all things the church would be built up. It would be matured. That's also why Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 4, it says that the gifts were given so that the church would be matured, and that the people would be equipped for works of service. And so all of these are focusing on the church being built up and the church being edified. In short, the gifts were given so that the church would be enabled to perform its ministry that Christ intended for it. Another reason why the gifts of the Holy Spirit were given is so that the church would be empowered to be witnesses of Jesus Christ. We see Jesus promising to his disciples in Acts chapter 1 verse 8, just before his ascension. He says to them, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." And so we see right throughout the book of Acts that the apostles, the disciples, some of the deacons are operating in these gifts of the Holy Spirit right from the day of Pentecost, where they are speaking in unlearned languages, in tongues. We know the story of how they saw tongues of fire descending on them while they were praying in the upper room, and they started to talk in these unlearned languages. But what were they telling? They were telling the wonders of Christ. They were proclaiming the good news of Jesus to all of the Jews who happened to be in Jerusalem to celebrate this festival of Pentecost. And so we see them operating in gifts of healings, in working miracles, as they heal the sick, and all of it again was a means to be able to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ. And so not only are the gifts given to serve the church and to serve others in the local church, but also they are given to be able to serve those who do not yet know Christ by telling people about Jesus. And like I said, I believe that in all of these things, this is one of the primary means and the primary reasons why the gifts were given, so that again Jesus Christ would be glorified as we use our gifts to be able to serve the church and to serve those who do not yet know. My final point, as we look at this question of why were the gifts given, they were given to serve the local church. They were given for the common good. They were given so that we would receive power to be able to be Jesus Christ's witnesses throughout the ends of the earth. And the final point is that they were also given as a foretaste of what is to come. Paul carries on again in 1 Corinthians 13, still speaking into spiritual gifts. He says that the gifts will pass away when the perfect appears. You see, these gifts, again, are not the ultimate goal. They are not ultimately what we long for. But rather the gifts are there to help us keep looking forward to the day when Christ would return. Today we have gifts of healings. One day we will have new resurrected bodies that would never suffer decay, that would never suffer from illness. Today we have words of knowledge. One day we would fully know, just as we will be fully known. One day when we see Christ, we will know all things. And so again, in all of these things, we don't make the gifts of the Holy Spirit the ultimate goal, but rather again, the gifts are a means for us to serve each other, to serve the world, and to keep our eyes fixed and focused on Christ and when He would return. I pray that this would help you. I pray that you would be able to study the scriptures, to be working through these texts given. 1 Corinthians 12, 13 and 14. We see 1 Peter 4, Peter again looking at gifts. We see in Ephesians chapter 4 this concept of spiritual gifts. And I pray that you would work through these things in your own time. Be praying that the Holy Spirit would enlighten you, give you a spirit of wisdom and of knowledge, enlighten the eyes of your heart so that you would know Him more, that you would love Him more, and that you would pursue Him with all that you are. I pray that you have a great day. God bless.